In this video, I'm going to set up Windows 11 23H2 on a Dell XPS 139305. In order to install Windows 11, you're going to want to make sure your PC satisfies Microsoft's minimum system requirements. Press Windows and R and type in msinfo32 to get the system information. Here you're going to get the generation of processor, and Microsoft lists an 8th generation Intel processor or newer as the minimum system requirements. A more accurate indicator of the capability of the hardware is the SMBIOS version, and you want an SMBIOS version of 3 or higher to satisfy the general system capability required to run Windows 11. msinfo32 will also give you details about your system model and system manufacturer. If you press Ctrl Shift and Escape to get to the task manager, you can have a look at the system's CPU, memory and disk. So I'd recommend having at least 8 GB of RAM and a solid state drive in order for Windows 11 to run okay on your PC. So if I just carry out a search for download Windows 11, I should be taken to Microsoft's website. So details about the version will be shown at the top. And then there's going to be 3 links: the Windows 11 Installation Assistant for upgrade installs, the Windows 11 Media Creation Tool, and also the direct ISO download link. So I prefer the last option, so I'm going to select Windows 11. And then I'm going to select English International, which is English UK. And then I get my 64-bit download link. So this installation ISO is pretty large because it's multi-edition and also contains a large number of drivers required to set up Windows 11 out of the box. For example, network drivers. Unfortunately, it lacks storage controller drivers, which are pretty critical because without the storage controller driver, you can't see the system's internal solid-state drive, and therefore you can't install Windows. So I'm going to go to Dell Drivers and Downloads and select my XPS 139305. Now, unfortunately, I need to select Check for Updates. And then I want to just cancel this support assist so I can get to the operating system. And then the category I want to select is storage. And I want this Intel Rapid Storage Technology driver and application. Unfortunately, both Dell and Intel list this driver as a EXE, which means it can only be extracted on Windows. So I'll also just download the driver from Intel just in case you're not using a Dell system and need to go direct to Intel. So essentially on the Intel page there's instructions for extracting the driver. Now these instructions will only work on Windows because it's an application. In the past it used to be a zip file and you could just extract them, and this made it possible to prepare Windows installation media, for example on Linux. So within these instructions is the command to extract a driver. So the Dell setup is a lot easier because basically when you launch the Dell EXE and accept the user account control prompt, you've got the option to install or extract. And if you select extract, you can just select the downloads folder and then create extracted folder called SetupRST.exe, and I'll just add the Dell to the end of this. For the Intel driver, you need to right-click the downloads folder and select Open in Terminal and copy and paste the command that they give. And I'll just add Intel as a suffix to the end of this. So now we've got the extracted folders. So I can open these up side by side. Because the Dell driver is basically a repackaged Intel driver, the structure is essentially the same. So we've got this production folder, and then we've got Windows 10 64-bit, and then we've got a build, and then drivers. And then we've got basically different storage controller drivers corresponding to the different SATA operation that's going to be configured in the UEFI BIOS. So VMD seems to be the most common for newer systems with NVMe solid-state drives. And essentially using this storage controller operation will give the maximum performance. So unfortunately, Microsoft don't have a pre-installed utility for creating a bootable USB on Windows, like most Linux distributions do, for example. And the best utility for creating a bootable USB on Windows is called Rufus, which is a third-party utility. So I'm going to go to the Rufus website and download the latest version. So if I go ahead and launch Rufus and accept the user account control prompt, I can then select and load the Windows 11 installation ISO. Now before using it, I can check the checksum, and we're only really interested in this SHA256 because Microsoft lists this on their website, and if I just press Ctrl and F and paste it, we can see that it matches. So the partition scheme should be GPT, and the file system has to be NTFS because it's got files on it that are greater than 4.0 gigabytes. So we need 16 gigabyte USB flash drive or higher, and this should be listed under device. And when we select start, we're going to be given some options for Windows user experience. Now some of these options only worked for older builds of Windows 11 and don't work for the latest build. Microsoft, for example, have been a bit more stringent with their minimum system requirements. So they will actually block some really low-end CPUs. Windows 11 would perform absolutely dreadful on such systems in any case. So now the installation media is complete, and what we need to do is go to the downloads folder and just copy this extracted driver to it. So if I right click the start button and select disk management, notice that the USB flash drive has a main NTFS partition, which essentially contains the installation media. It also has a small FAT partition, and this is because some earlier UEFI BIOSes required a FAT partition in order for the USB device to show in the boot menu. And that's all that this additional partition is used for. So now we've got everything we need to install Windows 11 on this XPS 139305. So I'm going to shut it down, and now I'm going to power it up and press F2 to enter the Dell UEFI BIOS setup. So we've got the system overview, the BIOS version, the service tag. We've got details about the system requirements such as the processor generation, the memory, the video controller, the wireless card, and so on. If I go to boot sequence, I'm essentially going to delete all the old boot entries. I'm going to check that secure boot is on, and it's essentially using secure boot with default settings. So I can just leave integrated devices at their default settings. If I go to storage, notice I've got the storage controller operation. So here we've got a number of options, and the default for Windows should be RAID on. Notice that this requires the Intel VMD driver in order to work properly. So this setting will give the maximum performance. However, if you're using Linux, you don't have the driver because there's no Linux VMD driver. There's only a Windows VMD driver. So this option sometimes gets changed, but you should use RAID and load the VMD driver in Windows for maximum performance. If I go to the Security tab, I'm going to enable the data wipe, and I'm going to need to carefully read the questions and select the right answer here because there's some double negatives to prevent you from accidentally erasing all the data on your system by mistake. So most of the other options are at their default settings. And now I can just go ahead and apply the changes and then exit. So the system should reboot and the prompt for Dell Data Wipe should display. So if I go ahead and select continue and then select erase, the internal NVMe solid state drive should be wiped pretty quickly. If you don't have a solid state drive, this will take several hours. So now that the data wipe is complete, power up the system and press F12 to get to the boot menu. So here there's two partitions. We've got the NTFS partition and the FAT partition. So generally you're going to want to select the first partition, but if it doesn't boot, then select the second partition. So select your regional settings and then select install. It's going to input the OEM product key from the BIOS and take you to the license agreement screen. Select custom and notice that the NVMe solid state drive doesn't display because it's no storage controller driver. So we need to select load driver, and unfortunately the loading driver doesn't really search recursively between folders. So we need to select the folder that the drivers are contained in and not a parent folder. So in this case, we need to select the VMD subfolder. Notice that we used the RAID SATA operation, but it mentioned the VMD driver in the UEFI BIOS setup. This may differ for your specific system, depending on the configuration of your drives. So notice that two drivers display, so what we want to do is just select them both and then select next, and now the NVMe solid state drive displays. So this procedure will work with both the Dell and the Intel driver, because the Dell driver is essentially a repackaged version of the Intel driver. So I'm just going to select back and use the Dell driver. And now I'm going to select next. And now the Windows 11 installation will proceed. So it's going to copy the Windows files, then it's essentially going to extract them, and then it's going to install the features, updates, and then prompt for a restart. So you can remove the Windows 11 bootable USB at this stage, and then the system should boot, taking you to the Windows 11 out-of-the-box experience setup. So unfortunately, Microsoft have become annoyingly persistent, trying to force the user to sign in with a Microsoft account during the Windows 11 out-of-the-box experience setup. And they've made changes to both Windows 11 Pro and Windows 11 Home. Now, I work in a company that basically operates as an OEM for scientific equipment. So we want to install Windows 11 with a local account, install our software, test that our scientific equipment works, and then give the user the option to switch to a Microsoft account later in the future. These changes that Microsoft have made have just become rather annoying for us. So notice when we don't connect to an internet, we can select I don't have internet, and we can select continue with limited setup. So this gives the option to sign in with a local account. Now notice that there's no back here. There should be a back here, so you can actually go back and reattempt to connect to the internet. So I'm going to need to power off the system and re-enter the out-of-the-box experience setup in order to get back to this screen. Okay, so this takes me back to the start of the out-of-the-box experience setup. So I'm going to select my regional settings and keyboard options. Now I'm going to select a wireless network and I'm going to connect to it. So after connecting to the internet, it's going to search for some updates. And then it's going to prompt you to name your computer. So I'm just going to call it XPS 9305. And then it's going to reboot while it applies the computer name. And then it's going to ask you to set up for personal use or to sign in to a work account. Now notice that you're essentially forced to sign in with a Microsoft account. There's no option here for an alternative sign-in option. And also the out-of-the-box experience setup is going to remember your wireless network password, so it's automatically going to connect to the internet, taking you to this setting. So if you go to sign-in options or create an account, there's no options to sign in with a local account. So Microsoft are really trying to force a user to sign in with a Microsoft account here. So the UI doesn't let you sign in without a Microsoft account. The other ways to sign in don't mention a local account like they used to in the previous builds of Windows 11 and Windows 10. So when you attempt to sign in here, it's going to try and send an email to the email that you provide. So if it doesn't exist, you're going to get a warning. Now, if it does exist, such as a@a.com, and you input the incorrect password, because this is used so often, it's going to tell you there's a problem. And then because there's a problem, it's going to allow you to sign in with a local account. So I'm going to select sign in with an online account and I'm going to use my test email. And then I'm going to input my password. And because I've set up Windows 11 on multiple PCs, I'm going to be given the option to use the settings that I supplied to the other PCs. So I can select more options. And I've installed Windows 11 quite a few times, so I'm just going to select set up as new PC. So my laptop's docked with the lid closed down, so I'm not going to use the fingerprint sensor. So I'll skip this. I'll create a PIN, so I'll just create a 4-digit PIN. And then I'm going to be asked whether I want to allow my location setting. So I'll need this for relevant maps and weather information, for example. I'm going to include the optional diagnostic data. I'm not going to supply them my keystrokes. I'm going to opt for tailored diagnostic data experiences. And I'm not going to allow use of an advertising ID. Under Customize Your Experience, I'm just going to select Development, but you can optionally select the setting that's most relevant to you. In the next screen, I'm going to skip the Android setup. In the next screen, be a bit careful because if you select Next, it's going to back up your desktop documents and pictures to OneDrive. And this is good if you've got an Office 365 subscription because you've got 1 terabyte OneDrive storage and therefore your desktop documents and pictures are backed up. If you don't have this, then you're essentially going to use up all your free storage and you're going to be nagged in order to buy storage via an Office 365 subscription. And then the final screens of the out-of-the-box experience setup will display, taking you to the Windows 11 desktop. So if File Explorer is open, notice that desktop documents and pictures have the cloud icon beside them, meaning that they are automatically synced with OneDrive. And in Documents, I've got this Python scripts folder from a previous Windows installation. I've also got a couple of documents on my OneDrive folder. Now, because I installed Windows 11 Pro using a Microsoft account with OneDrive integration, Bitlocker has automatically been applied to my system drive. So notice that Bitlocker is on and I've not turned it on. So this will encrypt the drive. Desktop, documents and pictures will be saved to OneDrive. However, any other folder won't be. So there's a chance of you having data loss. For example, if your system can't boot properly and you get locked out of your system by Bitlocker. So Windows 11 Home does not have Bitlocker. It's a Pro-only feature. So it shouldn't be enabled if you've got Windows 11 Home. So now we want to check for updates. So right click the Start button and select Settings and then select Windows Update to the left and then select Update. This will search for a number of drivers available on Microsoft's Windows Update servers alongside Windows 11 security updates. Select Restart Now to restart your computer and finish installing the updates. Once the updates are installed, you're going to be taken back to the Windows 11 desktop and you can go ahead and check for additional updates. Now, unfortunately, Microsoft have fragmented Windows Update with the Microsoft Store. So the apps pre-installed in Windows may be a bit out of date. So these need to be updated as well. So if we open up the Microsoft Store, we can see we've got a number of pre-installed apps. And some of these will be pre-installed because we've got Intel hardware. So there's not too much here that's applicable to my system. The Intel Optane is generally a solid-state cache drive, so you've got a small solid-state drive and a large capacity mechanical drive. And because the large capacity mechanical drive is so slow, the smaller solid-state cache drive is used to cache some files to make boot times faster and so on. This is normally only present in kind of lower end Inspiron systems. And the RAID volume is essentially for more advanced systems such as the Precision range, which can have multiple drives and you can set up a multi-volume RAID drive. So that's what the options in Intel Optane memory do. So what we want to do is open up the Microsoft Store and select Get Updates. And the Microsoft Store itself will update, so that's why it closed and I had to open it again. So essentially I wanted the Windows terminal and the app installer to be updated. So if I right click the Start button, I can select Windows Terminal and it should be configured to use PowerShell by default. So now I can use the Windows package manager called WinGet and I'm going to search for Dell. And what I want to install is Dell Command Update. Now, unfortunately, there's two versions here. They're essentially the same product, so I want to install the latest version. So it's got the ID Dell.commandupdate.universal. Now, in order to install this, I'm going to need to accept a user account control prompt. So now Dell Command Update is installed, I can go ahead and launch it. So to the bottom, there is an option to download a complete driver library. So this is going to download the Dell cab file for the XPS 139305. And Dell Command Update is then going to extract this and install all the system drivers for the XPS 139305. So once it's done this, it's going to prompt for a restart. And after these drivers are installed, we'll be taken back to the Windows 11 desktop. We should launch Dell Command Update again to check for additional drivers that aren't included in the cab file. So these drivers have been essentially released after the cab file, or they're additional drivers for additional peripherals such as the Thunderbolt dock. So one of the things that got updated was Dell Command Update itself, and this is a bit disappointing that the latest version wasn't on WinGet. So Microsoft have been gradually rolling out some new features to Windows 11. So you've got widgets, which basically gives information about the weather, some stock markets, some traffic incidents, has a link to your photos, and unfortunately has a lot of mainstream news. Now the mainstream news is woeful in the UK, so you're probably going to want to block most of the things, and then it's maybe going to look a bit better. So unfortunately, it seems just to basically have mainstream news, which is essentially doom and gloom. There's no setting just to have, for example, tech articles or scientific publications or something that's actually credible. So hopefully in the future, these types of things will be added so you can actually read things that are relevant and not doom and gloom. So we've got the start menu in the middle, so we can just go ahead and clear it up a wee bit. We can also create folders if we want. So if I open up Notepad, you'll see that it's now got tab browsing. And if I press Windows and full stop, I'll get to the Emoji panel. So here I can just select a mathematical character. And if I press Ctrl and V, I can turn the paste clipboard on. So this allows me to basically have a clipboard which I can copy and paste multiple items from into. If I press the print screen button, I get the option to take a screenshot of a selection, a window, or the entire screen. The snipping tool itself has been updated, and it's now also possible to use it to record the screen. So notice that we can change it from this picture to this video recording. And there's also some options for using the microphone and so on. So while we're carrying out the screen recording, we see this timer at the top. And we can use this to stop the screen recording. And here we can preview the screen recording in the snipping tool. And then we can use the save button to save the screen recording. So it's going to save in videos by default using MP4 format. So notice that the timer itself doesn't display in the screen recording, it's not incorporated into the screen recording. Screenshots taken using print screen will automatically be saved in screenshot subfolder of pictures. I've actually got a lot more than I thought I did, probably from a previous installation. So one of the other major new features is the inclusion of the chatbot. So if you open up Microsoft Edge, you can open up chat. It's also available directly from Windows using the chatbot icon. So the chatbot's generally okay for something procedural. It'll give you a basic overview and then you can ask for more information, and is generally good for something like programming, which is essentially extremely procedural and has a lot of documentation associated with it. For something a bit more subjective, such as relationship advice, it's going to be quite generic. However, you can try it out and ask it all sorts of strange and wonderful questions and see what it gives you. So we can clean the desktop up a bit. So for some reason, we've got this woman on the search bar. So we can get rid of her by selecting search icon only. We can also change some of the other settings. So for example, if you don't like the widgets, you can turn these off and you can move the taskbar to the left, which is a bit more traditional. Windows 11 also has a new Outlook application. So it's supposed to be integrated into Microsoft Edge, but for some reason it can't connect in my case. Let me just open up the app and go for the default settings for the setup. Because I'm signed in with a Microsoft account, it's going to sign me in. So although I'm signed in, it's not working with Microsoft Edge. And if you open up the legacy mail or legacy calendar, you're going to be given a notice that the applications are depreciated and probably will be removed at some point. So after restarting the computer, the Outlook tab in Edge now works. So in Windows 11, Microsoft have pre-installed a video editor called ClipChamp. This is supposed to be essentially a modern implementation of their Windows Live Movie Maker. So if I open this up and have a look at a video, I can add this video to the timeline. I can also crop part of it. And I can split it. And then I can use the sliders to crop it, or I can move elements along the timeline. Now, for each video file, you have the option to detach the audio. Now, unfortunately, there's some features that I would say are obviously missing from ClipChamp, just for the first time use. So you've got the option to add audio here, but notice there's no option just to have a narration. What you can do is record another video and essentially split the audio of it and then add this to the timeline, but it's a bit cumbersome. If we have a look at the legacy movie maker, we can see that some of these operations are just much easier to carry out. So for example, we can go ahead and split this. So here you see you've got some additional sliders in ClipChamp, which are a bit more modern and probably easier to use in this context. However, if we go to the Home tab, we've got this record narration. And this should really be included in ClipChamp. So for example, I can give this video a voiceover, and then when I click stop, my audio track is at the bottom of the video. So going back to ClipChamp, the screen settings are basically just screen and camera or camera and screen. And the only audio only option is this text to speech.
Hello world.
Hello world.
Hello world. Hello world. Hello world.
Hello world.
Hello world.
So it's pretty interesting, but it's maybe hard to get the actual timing for an actual video to have this as a voiceover. So I'm playing the video, I'm not hearing the sound, I've not added the sound to the track yet. So let me just fix that.
Hello world.